Hello and welcome to this episode of Superhero Ethics, also going live on the Twitch channel of Focused Infinity. Focused Infinity is run by my old high school buddy Logan, who is also a great content creator himself. And together we're going to be discussing the topic of how do you consume media with a critical eye? What does it mean to look at the stuff you loved as a kid and think, this hasn't aged well? How do you make decisions about what to consume and what not? When is it okay to just have a bit of an escapist fantasy, and when are things just... the justice part of it just doesn't make sense for you. All that more we're going to discuss right after this commercial break we have no control over. Welcome back. Once again, I'm Matthew, your host, and as I said, I'm joined tonight by Logan Grendel. Logan is someone I've known for many, many years. We went to high school together. We were in musical theater together. And we've continued to bond and talk over many years about politics and media and all sorts of great things. Logan's been a guest on my podcast a couple of times before and has recently been doing a lot of his own great content creation. And that really got me thinking about wanting to have him back on. And so we started talking about this topic of how do we view things with a critical eye. So, Logan, how are you doing tonight?
I am doing pretty well. How about yourself?
Not bad, not bad. You know, obviously a little bit's going on in the world right now. We're all kind of doom scrolling to some extent.
Yes, indeed.
Nice to it's kind of fitting what we're doing actually, because we're taking a break somewhat to escape from that and talk about pop culture, but also talking about how sometimes it's hard to just escape into pop culture because we bring all these conversations with us. What's your kind of general philosophy? I mean, just kind of getting started on this topic of how is it for you to navigating these questions of enjoying pop culture, where often a lot of times the values of it or the ideas of it don't really fit with what you might want them to be?
Yeah, it is a super interesting question, and it's definitely one that I think about a lot, and I'm glad we're discussing it. How I engage with it is, unfortunately less and less in general, but when I do, I do a lot more thinking about what it is and who's creating it and who's making money from it, and who is it supporting? Because we are the system. As much as we don't like to think of it that way, like we like to think of the system as outside of us. But one of the big lessons about the current time for me is that we are, in ways great and small, the system, and the ways that we play into it are very important. And even those of us who are otherwise knowledgeable and tuned in. We all have our vices, and a lot of those vices come in the form of pop culture. Our favorite fandoms, our favorite music, our favorite movies, things like that are just all ways that we participate, sometimes unwittingly and sometimes, with a sort of hands thrown up approach to it, because there's only so much you can do to avoid it. But there are ways, and I think, we will talk about some of those.
Definitely, and I like especially the point you're getting to about the throw your hands up. That one of the phrases that I think we're going to keep coming back to is the I forget exactly who said it, maybe but the idea that there's no ethical consumption under capitalism, and just the idea of like what does it mean to maybe try to really be as focused as you can on living out your values, living out justice as you see it in the media you consume, and how close to that can we get, and where are there compromises, or where should there not be compromises?
Yeah, I'm not 100% certain who first said there is no ethical consumption under capitalism, but I find myself thinking about that saying all the time, because sometimes it is used as an excuse, right? Because the basic idea is true, certainly, but also some people who are otherwise leftists will say it basically to say, well, I'm going to shop on Amazon because there's no ethical consumption under capitalism. Therefore, every purchase I make is equal. And that I 100% disagree with. And I think that's kind of why we're talking about this right now. It's like, consuming critically as opposed to just saying that everything is all the same since the system is so broken.
Exactly. And I think what you just said is such an important part, especially because it gets to what I think is kind of my overall thought on this question. And from talking to you a bit, I imagine you're in a kind of similar place, which is that I don't think there's any one way to say, like, here's the line, and, something can be 90% good and it's okay to do, but if it's 85%, like, it doesn't work like that. so much of this is about everyone picking their own battles, and figuring out what is the things that mean the most to you, and for someone it might be, anything involving sexual violence. They will never watch, they cannot consume, they can't do it. But something else that might bother, something that might bother someone else, they're not as concerned with, and that, or just that, they say, I'm going to do my best to kind of be as ethical as I can in this part of consumption, but there's this other area where I need to at least, do some kind of a break. And I think that's one of the things that we're going to be talking about here is how do you figure out for yourself, like, what's the stuff you consume, what's the stuff you don't, in ways that aren't about, being self-righteous and telling everyone else what to do, but just figure out how does it not become what you just said, the complacency of, well, since everything is a little bit corrupt, any decision I make is bad, so I'm just going to do whatever the hell I want.
Right. That's a good question. For me, this is not it's not a hard and fast rule, and I don't have like a spreadsheet where I write down things and figure it out. But there's generally like let's say 4 categories, right? We have things that I'm super happy to support. We have things that are cool. We have things that are problematic, and we have things that are unconscionable. And those are sort of it's a rough outline of anything that I'm consuming, whether it be like, literal products or movies or books, whatever it is, music. So those are sort of the categories that I put things into. And the rest of it is, honestly, and I think that this is true for everyone to some degree, but the rest of it is just based on how I feel about certain things. Right. And honestly, I will give not a pass to things that are unconscionable, but things that are problematic, I will give a pass to because of my emotional attachment to them. And I just acknowledge that as a function of my humanity, right? It's just, I do have to acknowledge my humanity and also let myself enjoy things when they don't cross over the line into the unconscionable. Like, well, I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, but yeah, I think that's kind of a good way to look at it because that's at least a starting point to look at it. And everyone has to make their own decisions about which category different things fall into.
And I think that's a really good way to put it. And it is kind of actually a good segue because the next question I wanted to ask is about, is purity a reasonable goal? And it sounds like kind of both of us, I think to some extent it's no, because like you said, that humanity. One of the things I've been most grateful for is the people who have really emphasized in my life that any kind of like justice work, any kind of like just being awareness of the trouble in the world and wanting to do better, that self-care is still a part of it, and that there's an extent to which if you, and it might, for some people it might be like, look, watching that movie that you absolutely loved in the 80s that has some pretty problematic gender roles, but it makes you smile when you've had 12 hours of a crappy world. Yeah. Maybe that's what you need to do, and it's that, to me, I think that's one of the most important things here is that idea of what's the role of self-care in this in terms of like, what are the things that like you said, they can bring you some joy, they can help feed your humanity. Because one of the things I see all the time is people who are trying to be so, if you, almost anything in the world, if you quit it cold turkey, there's some people who can do that, but most people, if you like just quit something entirely with no outlet, you're almost always going to go back to it, And the folks I know who have just said, like, I'm never going to watch any movie again, I'm never going to watch any TV show again, 6 months or 6 years later, maybe they're still doing that, but more likely they're just like, all right, give me all the Fox reality shows I can find. I don't care anymore, And so a lot of this, I think, is about how do you able to say, like, here's the stuff I love, here's the stuff I really want to enjoy.
So I actually do aim for purity, but I don't mean that, the understanding that it's not possible. It's like, it's the classic, really the idea is like, you always want to strive for the absolute best that you can possibly do, but you don't want to deride yourself for not achieving it because it's impossible. And I think that it's, for me, and, everyone's mileage may vary, but I think it's better to strive for perfection or purity or whatever, but understand that you will not achieve it, right? Like, so there are times when, and I'm also kind of, when it comes down to it, I am kind of a cold turkey person with some things. Like, for example,
That's fair.
when Lil Wayne recently, that debacle, when Lil Wayne came out in support of Trump, I think Lil Wayne is one of the best rappers, like literally top 5 best rappers of all time. He's fucking brilliant when it comes to being a rapper, but his political stances are unconscionable. And he's still alive, and he's still making money from every time I listen to him on Spotify. So when that happened, we were done. You know, sorry, I can't fuck with you anymore. You know, maybe after you're gone, I'll listen to your music again, because like that's another one of my rules. Like if a person is no longer alive and they're not actually making money off of off of me consuming their product, then it's basically a victimless crime at that point, right? As long as I'm not like actively promoting it or whatever. But even that, you know, it doesn't matter. But for someone who is alive and who is like actively making money off of my choices, especially when it is so fresh and so recent, I'm happy to go cold turkey, because and this is something I guess maybe we should talk about a little bit in greater depth later, but there is so much media. There are so many artists, and I think as both a as a sort of an abolitionist and a revolutionary and just a person that wants everything to be different and better, I think one of the first things we need to think about is decolonizing and decommodifying our brains in terms of the very notion of popularity. There should be more popular things. There should be more things that have maybe a smaller base of fans, but a good sized one. You know what I mean? We should have millions of creators that each have thousands of fans, rather than a few that just have, millions, as it were.
No, and I definitely think, and I think that's one of the most exciting things. And honestly, part of what got me excited about doing this podcast is that there's just so many chances now for, the smaller pieces of media for people to get excited about, and just when I hear about these tiny things that are made by, people who are not the white, straight, cis males who normally get to, control content. Yeah. And you can find a following, with the democratization of media through the internet, through podcasts like this, can really become amazing there. So let me just start with this. Can you just kind of like, so we're setting the frame a little bit. Can you give an example of something where, Lil Wayne I think was a good one, but especially in terms of like a TV show or a movie, something where either you were excited about the idea of it and maybe decided not to because of stuff you heard, or something that like you really used to love and now you can't really watch anymore, you can't enjoy in the same way because of your kind of greater awareness of things, really makes you see it in a different light?
Yeah. A great example of that is Ender's Game. It is, I mean, it's brilliant. It's a brilliant book, and it is such a scathing indictment of imperial thinking and war and the usury of the young to fulfill imperial purpose, often without their knowledge, and even with their knowledge, with not fully understanding the scope of what it is they're really doing and how they're really doing it. I mean, it's really a brilliant work of art. But Orson Scott Card, who is still alive, is an Olympic level homophobe, and that's being being somewhere in the LGBTQ world, it's like, okay, why am I supporting somebody that has a problem with me as a human? Why do you? It's like, you don't deserve my money. You don't deserve me like helping you to get more famous and more knowledgeable. And so fuck it. We're done. We're done here. And it's even worse because there's a non-zero chance, and I have no evidence of this. I'm not saying that this is actually true. I'm not theorizing that this is actually something that happens, but there is logically a non-zero chance that what was done in Ender's Game is done to people who are literally operating drones, right? Who knows? They literally could put someone in the training simulation and have them actually doing real missions, since they're sitting somewhere in a bunker, 4 stories, 5 stories down in Nevada somewhere, with drones that are putting flames on the backs of little children somewhere in Yemen, and would have no way of knowing. So it's timely, and it's really fantastic. But having said that, I'm not reading it again. I did not see the movie, and sorry, dude, you gotta you gotta be better, and then we can talk. But otherwise, we're done here.
And I'm very glad you brought up Orson Scott Card, because for me, him and the Enders books actually kind of in different ways show two of the different principles that I think we're talking about. Because one of the things that I think we're starting to distinguish between, and we'll get to more as the podcast goes on, is like, and both these are different, but both these are important, but is, what do you do when the creator of content has ideas or does things that you find really problematic and that you don't want to support, versus when those ideas are in the content itself. And for me, Ender's Game is exactly what you're talking about. I think it's a very good book. I think it makes some very good points. The person who created it is one I never want to support. I have a battered old copy of Ender's Game that I bought 15 years ago, and I do still enjoy reading that book from time to time, and at some point that my copy is going to fall apart, and then it's just going to be done because I'm never going to buy another one.
Yeah.
But on the flip side, like, did you ever read some of his later books in the Ender series? Or I'm sorry, specifically in the Bean series? I
did not, no.
So there are later books that follow a side character from that world in which, as I think unfortunately happens with a lot of authors who have very strong views, he got popular enough that he didn't have an editor anymore, and so he could start putting more of his own beliefs into the books themselves.
Oh, dear.
And so you have books that have a lot of the best things of Ender's Game, like great characters and dialogue and very good idea explorations, as well as some virulently homophobic concepts, and characters who are introduced as trying to be, cured of their homosexuality through science and just awful, awful things like that.
Wow.
Ender's Game is a book where I can enjoy the book, but I can't support the creator. Those later books are ones that I'm not going to touch the book,
Right.
Even though there are many scenes and many characters in them I love, I just can't do it because the content itself has these things. And that term you made about decolonizing our mind and our content, that's the part of it. I know that I am as liberated and progressive and, kind of say this word, kind of humorously, but as woke as I want to think I am. Right. Reading garbage is going to affect you no matter how much you're against it. And so I think that those books are a great example of that, where we both get the stuff we avoid because of the content creator and the stuff we avoid because of the content itself.
That's a really good, that's a good point. I'm trying to think of an example of something for it's like for the content itself, but generally and thankfully, a lot of the stuff I've enjoyed, the content itself has not been super problematic, but I'm sure if I examine that further, I would find that is not true at all. Actually, I mean, I could in terms of music. Oh wow! I mean, there is tons of music that does not age well. And some movies as well, but most of my faves have stayed away from, at least in the major ways. Though of course you have to consider like sexism and racism being in America, right? Like there's going to be a lot of that in anything. I mean, in pretty much anything.
I'm a huge karaoke guy, and I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and my jam is a lot of old 80s rock songs, and most of the songs are ones where, like, I know the chorus and I know maybe, like, half the words of the first verse. And so I'll spin it up on karaoke and then get halfway through the second verse and be like, I can't sing these words. These are awful, So I hear you about the music.
Yeah.
Just to kind of drill a little deeper, when we talk about, like, using a critical lens or critical eye to look at the media we consume and the people who create it, what does that mean for you? Like, what are the things that you're looking for? What does that kind of analysis mean to you?
For me, having a critical eye just means watching out for things that are essentially trying to untrain me of things that I have learned. And if I support them, will basically be doing the same for others. Or will be putting, or even more importantly, will be putting people who are directly attacked by those ideas or concept in the uncomfortable and or literally painful position of having to deal with those concepts, because there's really just no reason for that, especially if we're looking at a piece of media as an escape, right? That's what they are, really. They are a way to make life bearable and enjoyable, in addition to all the, there's the work we have to do, and then there's the things that we do to make the work worthwhile. And if you're going to things to make the world and the work worthwhile, you don't want those things to be like hitting you, and you have to kind of like do damage control and basically like suffer through watching or listening to, et cetera, these works of art, especially if it does not serve a purpose. Because I don't believe that things should be completely sterile and anodyne. You should deal with difficult concepts. You should deal intentionally with racism and sexism, homophobia, with and with class concepts, especially. I mean, all of the above, right? But you should, if it's in a piece of art or if it's in something like that, it should be super conscious, and it should be in order to call attention to it without supporting it, and to call attention to it while tearing it down, essentially.
And I think that's a really good way of talking about it, especially in terms of that idea of the intentionality, because I think, like you said, I don't want things to be sterile. I am very happy when a show like says like, look, let's explore and let's ask questions about something about, racism or ableism or queerphobia or any of those things. And if the show asks a question in an interesting way and presents a possible answer that I disagree with, okay, cool. To me, then that doesn't make the media unwatchable. It means this media is inviting me into a conversation that I can have with it and talk about, like, how does this make me think about it, or even if I disagree with it.
Absolutely.
I think where I am often most bothered is when it feels like the thing is being done without any real recognition because it's just helping the plot or helping the idea. And to me, I think one of the best examples I can use, and especially because it's, really in the superhero wheelhouse that this podcast is all about, is, did you see the second Avengers movie, Age of Ultron?
I did not.
Okay, so the MCU movies tend to be kind of really on the line for me of great escapism with sometimes some problematic ideas, sometimes some great ideas. Ultron, though, I think is one of the most problematic for me. Yeah, no, very understandable. And we'll talk about that in a bit. Ultron, for me, is, I think, one of the most problematic because it gets to a scene where two characters are talking about how they both feel like they are monstrous and broken. And one of them is the Incredible Hulk, and he's talking about how, like, he feels like he is monstrous and broken and he can't be a normal person. And the woman who he's talking to basically says that she understands and she feels monstrous and broken as well because due to the kind of training she went through to become a super spy, she can't get pregnant. And that, that trope of, a woman has to be able to get pregnant to fulfill her, sort of womanly worth, and to not have that as, it makes someone monstrous is both incredibly problematic and also just incredibly lazy writing in some ways, because it's just a trope you see so often. And in some ways, for me, that's also a part of what makes it that problematic, because, the idea that a particular person might feel that they are broken because of that, like, yeah, I could see that as an interesting character part. But the way it's presented, that idea is seen so often and becomes such a trope that it becomes problematic. And it becomes like you're just repeating the same idea over and over again that, anyone who might want to be able to get pregnant and can't is going to see that and feel attacked by.
Yeah, that's understandable.
And so to me, that's a kind of great example of, I think, what you're talking about as well, where I look at it, especially because of something you said that I really want to harp on, where you talked about, like, if someone else being harmed. One of the things I think is most important about that critical lens is to be able to, like, I don't have the desire to be able to physically carry a child at some point. I don't have the biology for it. And so that scene doesn't bother me necessarily. But it's my awareness that it's going to be very harmful to others that I think is important. And I think that's, for me at least, I think a very important part of the critical lens is not only saying, oh, this bothers me, but is being willing to listen and say, oh, okay, that didn't bother me at first, but I understand folks from this other community, it bothers them, and that matters to me.
100%. Yeah, that makes total sense. I mean, yeah, that would have been actually a great, I didn't see the movie, but that would have been a great idea. A great chance for them to, like, push back on that idea, for, like, and I don't know how he responds to her when she says it, but I take it by the way that you present it that he did not say, like, that doesn't make you broken at all, like, that, you know what I mean? That should have been the conversation, and that would have been, like, a great chance to push back on that, like, super stereotypical trope of what womanhood means, that's like, the
Right.
end goal of all womanhood is to like produce a child, as if like a woman is some sort of like incubator, rather than like a
Right.
whole ass, human being.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Not to mention all the transphobic parts of that, many women don't have the ability to get pregnant, and many non-women do.
yes.
Yeah, so it's just problematic on so many different levels. So we have our critical lens now, and now I kind of the next question is, so how do we make decisions? What's the, like you said, I think there's no sort of easy equation to run it through. But when you're thinking about like, is this a movie I want to see? You talked about that kind of like, does it get to the unconscionable level? Say more about kind of what are the things you think about in terms of like, are you going to watch this or are you not? Or are you going to recommend it to someone or are you not? Or are you going to spend money for it or are you not? Because I think in some of those there are different levels of conversation.
Totally. I'm glad you broke that up like that, because that is one of the things I was going to say is, if I'm going to be spending money on something, then my criterion are much more stringent for it. If it's something that I can come across for free or watch on, YouTube, then I'm more likely to give it a pass, because I'm not, on YouTube, I guess you're sort of helping to monetize it. But that's like, on infinitesimal, like sort of levels of amount of money you're giving it, but still,
right.
But, if it's something that I have to, for example, I don't fuck with Amazon at all. Right.
Yeah.
And, I understand that Twitch is owned by Amazon, and I'm newly on Twitch, and I will continue to say on Twitch every time that I'm on it, fuck Jeff Bezos. Like, he's literally the worst human being there is on the planet. And I will continue to believe that until he changes his behavior, right? So I don't buy anything off Amazon. I canceled my Amazon Prime years ago, and I will not like, I don't go to Whole Foods. I don't share or listen to the Washington Post, because and in every way that it is possible for me to not support giving this person money, and the not just him, but like the enterprises that he's created work on an extremely rapacious model of capture, and they reduce the amount that they put. They reduce the prices of their things to where they're losing money, to put everyone else out of business. And then after they're out of business, they either acquire those things and then they jack up their prices. So they fucked over both the original business and the people who are consuming from them. It's like it's capitalism taken to its worst extent, and without apology and without conscience, and also passed off as virtue, because in this society, people view things only in terms of like, I use this metaphor a lot, but like these fucking greedy people, they treat money as if it's the score in a video game, and they're just trying to get the high score. It's more money than they'll ever be able to spend. There is literally no reason that any human should accumulate that much money. It's bad for humans. It's bad for the economy. It is bad for society for there to be that amalgamation and accumulation of wealth, right? But yet it continues to be. So in the case of it, like, there is stuff that I really want to see that is now Amazon is, they've put their hat into the only on Amazon Prime ring. Like, for example, Borat just came out, right? And as problematic as Sacha Baron Cohen can be, I think overall, like, what he does is, I think he's brilliant, right? And I think he has to ride the line between problematic and good, because that's kind of what he does, right? Is that he's kind of stepping on the line in order to show like where the edges are, and kind of talk about a lot of really important things in society. But I have not seen it because it is only on Amazon, and it is what it is, right? So one of the big things for me is being okay with not seeing something. That's just it's got to just be okay that I didn't see that thing, because there's so much other stuff. There's so much other stuff to consume and do and create, and there is, literally the accumulated knowledge and the all the works of art and all, of humankind. It's on my phone. It's on my computer. Why am I super focused on one problematic fandom? It's like, going back to the Avengers series. Besides the fact that there's a few Avengers characters that I have always loved. I love the Hulk character. And I really love Black Cat, and a lot. I mean, a lot of the characters are super interesting, but I mean, considering all the people who own it and all the things that go, and even more importantly, every single one of those movies had to get funneled through the DoD. Okay, so they are in such cahoots with the state and with our our intelligence apparatus of the country that it's gross. You're like supporting the military and supporting like the jingoistic and globally fascistic imperialistic nature of this country by supporting these movies uncritically, right? So I mean, and I get it. If these are your favorite characters, like I'm definitely not here saying like you should not watch these movies, because especially if that's like your favorite shit and it brings you like tremendous joy, but it's important to realize how many ways it's woven into the rest of the world and the way that we work and the way that we see things.
And I think that's the most important point, is this idea of being aware of what are the consequences of the decision you're making, because it's funny, like the stuff you talked about, I do interact a little bit more with it, but I think there's kind of two illustrative points there. The first one, you talked about like never shopping on Amazon. I'm probably about 90% there, and I think I hadn't made a purchase on Amazon for probably about 2 years or so, until I am in a more rural, more suburban part of the world, and for about 6 weeks, there was really no store I could physically walk into safely.
Yeah.
And a lot of stuff I wanted to be able to get access to, I couldn't get. And we didn't have places around here that were set up to deliver yet, and so Amazon was often the only place to get the things I needed. I hated it, and it was what was necessary, though. And I think in part Logan lives in the middle of the city. I don't. And so we were able in different situations to make different decisions there.
I just want to say that the less money a person has, the less I think they should be blamed for certain choices, because our society is set up in such a way that, if you live in a place like you do, suburban or rural, there's maybe a mall somewhere near you, but you just don't have the same amount of choices. So it's not fair. And then you also have, the issue of how much money you can spend on something, right? Someone who has money, they should take great pains and can pay a little bit more and can wait a little bit longer for their item, or just pay more to get faster shipping from the actual person themselves. But a person who has very little money, you have to get the cheapest thing that you can get in order to keep going. So I think that's also important to consider, is your personal role in society, and your personal power and privilege level also plays into how you interact with things.
Yeah, and I think that's such an important thing, because one of the reasons why I'm always hesitant to talk about a topic like this is because you do have people who I think will often be very judgmental of other people's decisions. And often that does come from a huge place of privilege. The person who can afford to eat every ingredient that they put into any food they eat is ethically sourced and grown in the most possible way. And is judgmental of the person who shops at McDonald's because they're working 3 jobs, they don't have much money, and they don't have time to go shop for the ethically sourced stuff, let alone cook it, let alone clean, etc. The other thing that you also brought up, though, is I think this question of do you consume something like the Marvel universe? Obviously I do quite a bit. That's a big part of what we cover on this network, and on this podcast specifically. But I'm glad what you point out is something I've wrestled with a lot, especially because of the connections to Disney and all the problems that they have.
Yeah. And
one of the things I think, again, that you said is do you consume it uncritically? Where I wind up coming down is I often wonder, if I didn't have this podcast, would I be looking at it as much? And this is not me trying to justify it to anybody. It's just, I think, helpful to look at different ways of thinking about it. The way I approach it is, I know these things are being talked about already. I know people are seeing these things. And so if I can get them, if people are already going to see them, can I create content that helps them see them in a new way and maybe have a more, learn something more from them? Okay. Does that justify my encouraging more people to take part in something that is itself problematic? I'm not sure. But I think these are the kind of questions that it becomes so important to ask for each person, to say, where do I sit? Where, do I need to use Amazon, or can I limit it more? Do I need to, consume this content? Can I consume it in different ways? and all that kind of thing. Because I think, for me at least, each person is going to have to figure this out for themselves. Mm-hmm. But it's just so important that you ask those questions and that you be aware of what's the stuff going on behind what I'm seeing and what I'm enjoying that maybe I don't want to see.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I do think that, this is kind of a strange analog, but just, follow along for a second. Travel.
Go for it.
Travel is a thing that I think that Americans often do uncritically, because it is a thing that, especially middle to upper class Americans do, and they feel like it's just their right to just travel all over the world, and they do it uncritically, and they are supporting a lot of shit, which I think is pretty being straight up bad, but also just weird. And we consume other cultures as if they are, for example, fandoms, rather than this is a place where people live and where there's history and where there's problems that we might be contributing to. And, going to a place where there is tremendous poverty just to take a few selfies in front of, some old building. I find that's highly problematic, right? But if you're going to those places in order to talk about those things, and it is part of your life's work, I think that something being a part of the way that you're interacting with the world at large, especially if you're doing it in a way that educates and or elucidates how things are working, I don't think that's a justification, right? I mean, I guess in some ways, it is in the most overcritical way of looking at it. Sure, it could be seen as a justification, but if you're really on this podcast, if you're actually talking about all of the social and political and societal underpinnings of something, you are bringing a more critical eye to those who might not have been looking at it with a critical eye in the first place. And that overall, I mean, that's a net good. I can't see how that's not an unalloyed net good. So I think it is important to consider what you're doing with, it's like if you're just watching, Ben Shapiro because you like Ben Shapiro, that's problematic as fuck. But if you're going to watch Ben Shapiro and then debunk every single thing he says, which is pretty easy and wouldn't take that long, that's a much better, that you actually might be doing something for society.
Hey, listen, he came out very critical of Trump last night, and my head exploded. So, I very much get the point there.
This truly is the weirdest timeline. It's like that meme where they're like, your head's exploding because the worst person in the world just made a point you agree with.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask you this, and this is a question kind of specific to you personally, but it's one I know that you've thought about a lot. Logan is a name I know that you chose for yourself, in large part because, if I remember correctly, and this is my memory from 20 years ago, wow, we're old, but is because of how much you enjoy the character of Logan, of Wolverine from the X-Men.
Closer
X-Men
to 30
now being
years
very
ago
much
at this
part
point.
of the... Oh, God, yeah. So I'd like to hear you kind of talk a little bit about that in terms of what that character meant to you at that younger age, and how your feelings either have or haven't changed and evolved as you've kind of learned much more about the universe that X-Men and Marvel and all that inhabit.
So the name Logan, it does come from that character, and that was, and I would say probably still is one of my favorite characters, though, we've parted ways, long ago at this point. But it also was from just, sometimes you hear a name and you're like, that's my name. And it just happened to also be a character that I really enjoyed, because I was dealing with some of the same concepts at that point in my life. I mean, I was 13 when I decided to change my name, and the process of doing so was, it was a long process. It was I think another 10, maybe 15 years before it legally became my name. But
right,
yeah, it's kind of like someone who was your friend at one point, but then they go in a different direction, and that's okay. I don't believe in, it's like I'm friends with most of my exes, because even if most of them, with maybe one or two exceptions, right, they were good people. They're just people with whom I shouldn't have been dating them anymore, right? We went in different directions. We were together for a reason, and then we separated. And that is how I feel about that character and the fan, and I'm not really even drawn to still follow the character or anything like that. So I don't really feel that conflicted. I remember actually when we did the Logan on Logan episode of this podcast.
Yeah.
I had to do some end runs around supporting Fox in order to do it. But I mean, it's something that is behind me at this point, and I'm grateful to, but don't really feel any connection to. And also, I think the very first time I heard the name was, I think in remember the Babysitters Club, those books.
Oh God, yeah, that character
it was the name of someone's boyfriend.
Hilarious.
Yeah, and of course, that was at the time, especially as I was grappling with the nascent stages of like gender and sexuality. I was not about to be like, oh yeah, the first time I heard this was like some girl's book that I like secretly read on the down low. So going for Wolverine was the much more butch way to put it, and also just like the name of a lot of things, whatever. That is an interesting question, but the long and short of it is I don't feel the need to keep supporting something just because it was important, even seminal to some of the ways that I have grown as a human. There are times when you say goodbye, and that's totally okay.
Yeah, and I think that's helpful, especially because I think some of the places where this becomes most problematic is that stuff that we really enjoyed before we had developed a critical lens, or maybe before we had, decided that the critical lens would be a really important part of how we consume media. And now later we're sort of like, can I still go back and enjoy this? I know you talked about that, kind of that can be one reason why a person like makes the decision to watch something that's not unconscionable, but is still not great because of that nostalgia factor. Are there things for you that are still in that, like particular fandoms or books or things like that, or movies or TV shows that are, they're not great, but they brought you so much joy at earlier parts in your life, and they still can bring you some of that joy?
So I was thinking about that. Asterix the Gaul?
Oh yeah, I remember that. Okay.
I loved Asterix the Gaul as a kid. It was one of my most favorite stories and fandoms and whatever. And it was only later on, and especially the cartoon movies they made of it, where the out of control racism of it, and it was like, like all of the black characters are these like bumbling, moronic, like, over with like these cartoonish Africanized features, and they're like always sort of the comic relief, et cetera, et cetera. And I think I have a couple of Asterix books still. It's not like I'm gonna throw them out, you know what I mean? But and in some ways Asterix was less racist than, like, say, Tintin. That was even worse, right?
I was gonna say, yeah, Tintin to me is very much of a same variety, but even more so.
Yes, even more so. But that's something I think of it, and but occasionally I'll read it because it's really great, right? The stories are great, and it's really funny, and it's clever, and all that sort of thing. So, that is one that I still go back to, even though it's like riding the line of problematic, and unconscionable. Mm-hmm. But I think it stays on the side of highly problematic rather than shifting into unconscionable, because that's not like the main focus of it. It's just a thing that happens to be, it happens to be in there, unfortunately.
Mm. For me, I think the piece of content that really is in that same world is the original movie Ghostbusters. I really enjoyed the new one that came out. When it did, it made me think like, oh, I want to go watch the original with Bill Murray and remember how much I loved that movie. And I hadn't seen it in many, many years. And it was and I remember watching it with a partner of mine who hadn't seen it before. And the funny parts that I remembered were still amazing. And the comedy / action of it was fantastic. And the special effects were cheesy and ridiculous and great to watch. And the plot of Bill Murray being a straight up stalker in order to get a girl to like him, and showing you that the girl liked him because he was a stalker. I was embarrassed watching that part with my friend, and especially in some ways it was actually really illustrative to me of some of how in this particular case, toxic masculinity can really sink in.
Yes.
Because I remember being 16 or 17 and thinking, if I just do one more grand gesture, the girl will like me.
Yes.
And watching that movie, I was like, oh yeah, I wonder where I learned that. It's from movies like this. And
I haven't thought about that.
A year later, I was like,
in a long time.
Yeah. I mean, I was shocked watching it. And like a year later, I really got a hankering to see some of the funny scenes in it again. And I watched it. And I kept the fast forward button with me. And I just fast forwarded through all those romantic scenes because I couldn't watch that again. And I think those are great examples of the way this can happen. I think the things that hit us as kids, like, it's not wrong to still enjoy those things, but it's important to kind of to at least be able to think about it and be aware of, like, oh, what lesson did this teach me that maybe I should be trying to unlearn, try to get these ideas out of my brain? Because, I think for me, the reason why media criticism like this podcast is so important, that makes my podcast sound very self-important. I think we're a very small part of this idea. But the reason why it's so important to be critical of stuff is exactly that, is like, we don't learn to be racist because someone comes up and tells us, black people are going to be drug dealers. It's because every TV show we have shows us, a black person as a drug dealer.
Yes.
We don't learn to be sexist because, and so I think it's why it's so important to be able to say, like, yeah, I still enjoy this. I think on one of my first episodes of this podcast, I talked about the movie Desperado, which is still one of my all-time favorite movies.
Yeah.
And it's a movie in which a person just slaughters people by the dozens because they happen to work for a drug dealer.
Right, right.
And if you think about it, probably every one of the people he kills is just too poor or too not having other opportunities, and so they go to work for this drug dealer just to put food on their table.
See also Batman.
We shouldn't be cheering them being murdered. What'd you say?
See also Batman.
Oh yeah, Batman.
The older I get, the worse Batman gets. Like I used to love Batman. I mean, I guess I could put that on the list of characters that I used to really be into, and now I'm just like, no, you're literally the enemy. There was a great meme going around where it was like, Batman, you could do a lot more for Gotham by just paying your fucking taxes. And so running around, breaking the limbs of poor people and like the couple of supervillains that there happen to be. But like that's literally most of what Batman does is beat up like low-level criminals for practice.
And Batman, I think, is a really interesting example, especially because, and Paul and I, when he's on the podcast, he and I have talked about this a bunch of times, especially in our media, is that oftentimes there's things that we wish our characters would do, but they're not good. They don't look good on film in the way that the movie makers think they want, And in some of the most recent movie versions of Batman, they have made reference to the fact that Batman is using huge amounts of his wealth to try and help, address income disparities in the city or deal with, populations. But the fact is, 100 million people will pay to watch Batman punch the Joker.
Right.
They won't pay to watch him, do a ribbon cutting ceremony on a new, drug addiction center.
Right. Right.
And I think that's part of the issue is like, how does the media we watch make these choices to say, here's what we're going to show you and what we're not. Because I get that Batman's a character who I definitely get very defensive about, and then have to be like, no, this is true. He's a rich billionaire playing cop out there, and this is not good.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, Batman is. I now I think of him as a problematic fave.
I was going to say the one thing I would add to that is I think what's most important to me is does the creator of the content realize the problematicness of what they're doing? One character who I've really wrestled with, especially in some of the new TV versions of him, is the Punisher.
Ooh.
I started as when I first got introduced to justice ideas, I was very much in a pacifist mindset of like nonviolence is always the answer and vengeance is always evil and this kind of thing. And I've really grown through that, especially in the last couple of years, and understanding like the importance of that telling people that they can only fight for justice in certain ways can be really problematic and very colonial.
Yeah, it's true.
But I still have a lot of problems with revenge fantasy, and that so much of Punisher seemed that way to me. Until I read in an interview that's now gone around a lot with the creator of the Punisher, where he was very clear that he meant for the Punisher to be an anti-hero, that you were supposed to both cheer him on and then also feel kind of dirty for doing that because you were sort of like, I don't love that he's doing these things. It's not good, and that to me that also is a very important thing to me, of like when is the writers and when are they showing us that the things the characters are doing, that the writers know they're problematic and they want us to wrestle with, why do we enjoy watching this, and what does that make us think?
That's a good one. The Punisher is highly problematic for me, for a lot of the same reasons that Batman is, but even more just because of the whole, like, it's kind of like, it's sort of like a white dude revenge fantasy, and like he's the sort of character who
Very much so.
could be like, it's one of those things where it's like, who is enjoying this, right? So the fact that cops have chosen the Punisher logo as one of their main logos, like one of the main things you'll see cops with on their cars and shit is the Punisher logo with like the thin blue line through it. And that's the reason that I'm like, fucking hell, like, you got to be a lot more explicit about a character like Punisher, because 100% the wrong people are taking the wrong messages from this, right? And it's like, who are the people who are most often the Punisher's victims, right? And how much like that character always has really ridden the line for me, even before I realized why he rubbed me the wrong way so much, because there is a part of it that appeals to me as a person who, I do in some ways believe in, righteous vengeance. And there are some things that, from, a black character, or from a queer character, or from, even like a white female character, I could take more than I would take it from Punisher. But it's like, it has to be done extremely critically because of the world we have. And I think in the final analysis as it regards Punisher, like the creator, I think, needs to make some strong statements and be like, hey, police, like, no, you can't fucking have Punisher. You can't have him. Right? Well,
it's funny that the interview I was talking about is exactly that. It's the creator specifically is calling out cops who use that logo and saying, like, they totally misunderstand it. Yeah, I'll post a link in the show notes and show it to you, because it's
please do.
But it also raises a good question, because it's a creator intent, I think, really matters. But also, like, if I put something out there that's meant to be a satire of a terrible thing, and I write it knowing it's a satire, and I say later that it's a satire, but lots of people who watch it don't get that it's a satire and just love the problematic thing that I was trying to be satirical about.
Yes.
I haven't done my job as a creator,
I call that the Family Guy phenomenon.
Go ahead. I've never seen that show, so tell me more.
So Family Guy, sometimes it's often very, very funny, but a lot of the time it makes these ridiculously racist and or sexist jokes that are, sometimes they're funny, and to hear Seth MacFarlane tell it, he is lampooning the people who are making them, but he's also teaching people new jokes, right? It's like, it's one of those things where, like, if you end up teaching people new racial slurs and new fucked up things to say about women, and like people can be enjoying it uncritically, like, it's on you. It's on you to pull back on it, and I think he has in some ways, but it's one of those shows that they cross the line way, way, way too often, and it's sometimes 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 it's in good faith, I'm sure some are good people, but by and large, it just happens way too much, and that's why like Family Guy, I can't with Family Guy. And he did a little bit better of a job with American Dad. Yeah.
Seth MacFarlane is one I have very mixed feelings on, because I you don't always know, like, I can't look into his head, and I don't know what happens in the writer's room of Family Guy by any means. But what has become probably my favorite Star Trek show, at least in the last, like, 20 years or so, is Seth MacFarlane's creation, The Orville, which at first seemed like it was a satire of Star Trek, but then you realize it's really just a love letter to Star Trek. And a very funny thing happened, because in the first 5 episodes, it has a lot of the Family Guy type humor. And it doesn't quite cross the line into some of the stuff you're talking about, but still is not great, and is more kind of like scatological humor and just kind of frat boy nonsense that I'm really comfortable with. And then, and he has talked about this in interviews, about episode 6 or so, the people who had put the show on, the network and stuff, said, okay, you've proven to us this is a thing. Do whatever you want. At which point the show takes a hard left turn and starts being like Family Guy humor, but in a much more aware way, where almost none of the problematic stuff like that comes up. And when it does, it's very clearly talked about.
Right.
And one of my favorite examples of this is there's an episode in which an alien comes onto the ship and is very seductive and causes a number of people on the ship to want to sleep with the alien, including the captain, played by Seth MacFarlane. Mm-hmm. And the alien presents as a male gender. And all of the crew, like, totally makes fun of the captain for sleeping with this alien, you know, and after he had said, like, you know, I would never fall for it, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. They never once mention in any way the gender of the alien, and that's in any way part of what they should be making fun of. And the humor is very clearly not in any way about that. It's just about, you thought you were the one who could resist this, and you didn't. I remember watching that episode and thinking, this is the most low-hanging fruit a Seth MacFarlane could ever find. And I think he talked about it later in an interview that he made a very conscious decision. Like, he didn't want to go in that direction. He wanted to show that you could have fun with the situation without it being about the gender at all. And so I don't, part of me is like, is Seth MacFarlane this, you know, tortured artist who has all these great ideas, but the networks keep making him do things? Is he someone who is saying, I'll happily produce racist garbage if then they let me do the stuff I want to do? Which then is like, that's not a justification for the stuff you're creating. You know, it's such a confusing thing, but I think I'm glad you brought it up, because I think he's such an interesting example of someone who, like, if I just watched Family Guy, I'd probably never want to watch his stuff again. Right. If I just watched Orville, I'd have no idea he's creating this other stuff. You know, it's so divergent.
I feel like he is, I mean, you know, without knowing what's in his head, I feel like he is, I think of him kind of like I think of a lot of well-meaning liberals, right? Like, I don't think he's a by nature a bad guy. And I think that he did not realize at when he was doing Family Guy the damage that it could likely do, and that, like, you know, people on the left and the right and the deep right could be enjoying it. And I feel like I think it's important to realize that no matter what, a person is an American. If you're an American, your acculturation has largely been terrible. It's like we were talking about earlier with Ghostbusters. Like, every basically person who is acculturated male thinks or thought growing up that the way to get someone's attention, get a girl's or woman's attention, is to pursue her weirdly. You know, that was the thing to do, right? It was to not take no for an answer. It was to be super persistent. It was to do these weird grand gestures, and you know, that was literally what they told us and taught us to do, and not just in movies and in film and in TV, but like even at home. You know what I mean? Like that's the kind of thing that we were taught. So it's important to meet people where they are, and it's important to have compassion for the way that people are educated. And it seems to me that by what you're saying, that he has had an evolution that you love to see, right? But I would need to see more of it too, you know. And I mean, like I was going to say earlier, American Dad, he does a better job of lampooning some things without crossing the line, though it's still a little bit iffy, right? But it's better than Family Guy was. It's like a step more evolved, though like not nearly evolved enough. So I will probably have to check out this Orville, as you say, and not confuse it with anyone who makes popcorn.
I'll send you links to some of the particular episodes and see what you think. So I think some of it does some of what I love most about science fiction in terms of exploring ethical stuff, but it also, you know, has some problematic stuff. The last thing I wanted to comment on is that I do think it's also, for me, one of the things that is very important is thinking about my own particular place in things, and when it's important to kind of trust my gut and when it's important to listen to others. You know, I talked earlier about the need to sort of think about who does this affect in ways that it doesn't. But the other part of it is I think I'm much more comfortable hearing about someone who's part of a community that's being not treated well, being comfortable making that decision, than someone who's outside of that. And I'll give you an example. I'm a disabled person. I have a prosthetic leg and I use a wheelchair quite a lot. I have such a hunger for any kind of content that feeds into, that represents disabled folk, that there's some stuff that I will watch that is really bad in some other ways. And because it's some kind of disabled representation, and I want there to be more, but I'm not, but it's just not there yet. And on the flip side, I think there's some stuff that I am not probably comfortable taking part in, but I know other folks who would say, like, look, I'm part of the group that is critiqued by this. This is outside of media, but just one example. Like, I haven't had any food from a Chick-fil-A in years, because you look at like the horrible things they do, and I'm not comfortable with it. And I'm someone who's on the queer spectrum, but has an awful lot of het privilege and cis privilege and stuff like that. And a couple months ago, I was talking to a friend of mine and kind of made an offhand comment about, never eating food at Chick-fil-A. And this person is a person of color, queer person in rural Georgia. And she was talking about how her and most of her queer community go to Chick-fil-A all the time because that's one of the only options for them.
Yeah.
And, and part of what she said is, look, we're the community that's being attacked by this. This is what we decide. Like, fuck off to anybody who's going to tell us we're wrong. And I can understand exactly where she's coming from, because she's talked about how, like, white, straight liberals have often tried to tell her she's wrong for that, and it's...
Right.
I think that's one more important concept, is, like, where you personally sit in regard to the oppression that's being, like, either critiqued or reified has to be an important part of this conversation for you.
I agree 100%. I mean, yeah, and that this is where intersectionality comes into it as well, because, like, we're also talking about the class thing of, like, they have no choice of what restaurants are near them, and if, like, that's the chicken place that is affordable and nearest to where they are, then, like, they can either not have it or they can go to Chick-fil-A, right? I think that's there's a comedian named Fortune Feimster who talks about the Chick-fil-A conundrum. She is a lesbian comedian, and she's like, I won't repeat her jokes. You can find them yourself. But I think it's important to consider all of those things. And I do think that, yes, people who are in the group that is aggrieved, so to speak, do get more of a pass in, and I mean, it's not even a pass. It's just like, it's their choice to make how they interact with something. I think it's actually more incumbent upon, just like, it is more incumbent on people who have money not to support those Chick-fil-A's, right? It's incumbent upon straight people who live in those areas not to support the Chick-fil-A. If the Chick-fil-A goes away and is replaced with something else, it shouldn't be on, like, just gay people or people on the LGBTQ spectrum to deal with it. Just like, issues of racism are not for black people to solve. They are for white people to solve. And that is, like, one of the big things that as a society we need to get. Just briefly touching on the election, like, 55% of white women is the most recent count without all the votes being counted. And of white women voted for Trump again, which is more than fucking last time, right? And we're not even going to get into how many white men it was, right? This is but the conversation is always around, like, who people of color voted for and who leftists voted for and who, like, smaller groups voted for. And it's like, the problem is the call is coming from inside the house. It's you motherfuckers. You deal with it.
Yeah. I think that's such an important point. I think it really shows how this isn't, the lessons that we learn in thinking about what's the media we consume, it touches everything in our life,
Yes.
And kind of one thing wrapping up that topic, I think you'll appreciate. A good friend of mine who I often talk a lot with about how do we make decisions about what content we create and stuff like that. He will often sort of mention in conversations about this, Ender Wiggin is a chicken sandwich. Kind of connecting all this stuff about Ender's Game with Chick-fil-A debate, and, because it's all the same thing. It's all the same question of, like, what's the joy it brings you and what's the harm it's doing, and how do you balance that?
That's a great way to put it.
So this has been an awesome conversation. I have really enjoyed getting to just sit and talk with you, and for most part have been completely not wanting to just religiously check the news feed every 2 minutes to see what the infinitesimal changes in the vote count in Georgia and North Carolina have been. But we should probably start wrapping up. Is there any kind of last comments you want to make, though, or thoughts on this topic that we haven't got to touch on, or pieces of media you want to discuss?
No, I am, of course, tempted to talk more about the election situation, but I will leave that for another conversation since that is a much longer topic. I will say that just as a general message, referring to something I said earlier, don't feel the need to support. You don't have to support Marvel. There's go on Patreon and look for artists who are creating. Give your money to someone who is up and coming, right? Support someone who needs it. They don't need your money. They will be fine. They literally get operational support from the Department of Defense to make, big action movies and even the superhero movies, right? The people who have power and money will be fine. And as a society, we have this weird obsession with giving our attention to the people on the top. The people who, it's like one famous musician will have millions of people, and if something happens to them, poor ass people will be trying to give them money to help them out when they don't fucking need it, right? But the person who lives in your neighborhood, you're not supporting. So decommodify and decolonize your notion of who gets to create. Because what we need more artists. We don't need future. We do need a future. We need more artists, not fewer artists.
We need a future with more artists.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's only going to happen if we start being more conscious about how we give our attention and how we give our money, because the future is going to be dark and we need more art than we need anything else. And that also includes decolonizing your own ideas about your own art and whether or not it's worthy and whether or not you should be making money and whether or not you should get a Patreon if you have 2 patrons, right? Just to keep you going. Just do it, because we do need to take control over all aspects of our lives from essentially the overculture, right? And that includes art in all its forms. And I want to see more superheroes created by somebody who lives down the block from me, right? Even if you don't have the money to get the best inks and the best programs, if you've got a great story, let me hear it.
Yeah. No, I think that's so relevant. And I do see some reasons to stick with Marvel. And I know that's more on my side, but I think the points you're making are completely legitimate. And I think this kind of analysis is what everyone should go through. I'll just throw out a quick plug for what I think of as one of the most self-aware and non-problematic pieces of superhero media that I've seen in the last probably decade, and made by kind of independent creators who just were able to get through to Netflix. And that was the remake of She-Ra that came out about a year ago. Been a couple of seasons now. Did you ever see it?
No, but I will watch it immediately if you say it's good. I loved She-Ra when I was a kid.
The creator explicitly said that she wants you to assume that no one in the show is straight unless told otherwise. There is amazing racial diversity. There's amazing gender diversity. There are characters who are there's a shape-shifting character who is a changeling kind of a person. And, because they can change between any kind of species, color, gender, everyone refers to them with third person, with they pronouns.
Nice.
And that includes people who are oh my great God, that person is so awesome, to people who are they came in and they destroyed our plans and we have to hunt them down and kill them. But they still use
That's
they.
Awesome.
And it's little things like that, but there are people of different sizes, there's people of different ability levels. I think it is I'm sure there's some problematicness to it, and I'm also sure that anytime something problematic is spotted, if someone pointed it out to the author immediately was cool, thank you for letting me know. I'm going to try and fix that next season.
Nice.
So yeah, definitely something I would highly, highly recommend.
I'm on it.
Logan, thank you so much for being a part of this. You've been on a couple podcasts before, but I know you've started doing a lot more creating since then. For my listeners who want to know more, how can they find you? How can they find more places to listen to your thoughts and see what you're up to?
Okay, so I have the Focused on Infinity podcast, and that is available on Spotify, SoundCloud, Mixcloud, basically any of the places where you can stream podcasts. I'm on Instagram at Focused on Infinity. And I'm on Twitter at WatcherInfinite. And also you can support my Patreon, which is a repository of basically of all the things I do. I mean, I'm doing music, I'm doing the podcast, and also I'm teaching people how to create small space farms in urban areas, really anywhere. container farming, because I think that one of the big overarching concepts of my existence is taking control back from the larger systems into our own hands, and that includes everything down to food production. And my Patreon is patreon.com/focusedoninfinity. And also you can follow me on Twitch, twitch.tv/focusoninfinity. Focused on Infinity is basically where you'll find me all over the internet.
Awesome. Yeah, that's fantastic. And I'm definitely going to be hitting you up for some of the stuff about the food stuff. I have long been someone who tries to can as much as I can, because I really want to, take produce the couple of weeks and it's really at the height of the season, and just be able to, put it in situations where I can have it again and again and again and share it with people without having to kind of buy produce that's been shipped halfway around the world and stuff like that. But to me, the next step of it is being able to grow it myself. And I just moved into a place where we get a backyard, and next spring, we thought we would do it this spring. It turned out this spring was a little busy with a couple things happening.
Oh, wow, what happened?
But next spring, I know we definitely want to do some gardening, so I will definitely be hitting you up about how to do that kind of stuff. So
please do.
To fans, what's your take on this? Some of you may not really be thinking about this much in terms of content. Is this change that for you at all? Some of you may be being very critical about what you do consume and what you don't. Is there stuff that you might want to defend more that we talked about, or is there stuff that we talked about that we still watch that you think is completely unwatchable? Let us know. I'm always here for those conversations. You can find us on Facebook and on Twitter at Superhero Ethics. So if you go to that website, strandedpanda.com, click on Superhero Ethics. You'll find all the ways to contact me, get in the conversation. We'd love to hear from you. Love to keep this conversation going. And also on that website, you'll find all the other great podcasts, some that I'm a part of, some that other people are a part of, that really dive deep into fan conversation about all these different universes: Marvel, DC, Star Trek, Star Wars, all these sort of interesting things that are worth checking out. So please check all those out. Definitely check out Focused on Infinity. Great content Logan's producing. And thank you so much, and have a great day.